They would have died if the Indians hadn't found them. All the early part of the night they'd kept Sirius at their left on the southwest horizon, and Cetus out there fording the void, and Orion and Betelgeuse turning overhead, and they had slept curled and shivering in the darkness of the plains, and woke to find the heavens all changed, and the stars by which they had traversed not to be found, as if their sleep had encompassed whole seasons. In the auburn dawn, they saw the half-naked savages crouched or standing all in a row along a rise to the north. They got up and went on, their shadows so long and so narrow, raising with mock stealth each thin articulated leg. The mountains to the west were whited out against the daybreak. The aborigines moved along the sand ridge. After a while the ex-priest sat down and the kid stood over him with the pistol, and the savages came down from the dunes and approached by starts and checks across the plain like painted sprites. They were Diagueños. They were armed with short bows, and they drew about the travelers and knelt and gave them water out of a gourd. They'd seen such pilgrims before, and with sufferings more terrible. They eked a desperate living from that land, and they knew that nothing except some savage pursuit could drive men to such plight, and they watched each day for that thing to gather itself out of its terrible incubation in the house of the sun and muster along the edge of the eastern world, and whether it be armies or plague or pestilence or something altogether unspeakable, they waited with strange equanimity. They led the refugees into their camp at San Felipe, a collection of crude huts made from reeds and housing a population of filthy and beggarly creatures, dressed largely in the cotton shirts of the Argonauts who'd passed there, shirts and nothing more. They fetched them a stew of lizards and pocket mice, hot in clay bowls, and a sort of pignole made from dried and pounded grasshoppers, and they crouched about and watched them with great solemnity as they ate. One reached and touched the grip of the pistol in the kid's belt and drew back again. "Pistola," he said. The kid ate. The savages nodded. "Quiero mirar su pistola," the man said. The kid didn't answer. When the man reached for the pistol, he intercepted his hand and put it from him. When he turned loose, the man reached again, and the kid pushed his hand away again. The man grinned. He reached a third time. The kid set the bowl between his legs and drew the pistol, and cocked it and put the muzzle against the man's forehead. They sat quite still. The others watched. After a while the kid lowered the pistol and let down the hammer and put it in his belt and picked up the bowl and commenced eating again. The man gestured toward the pistol and spoke to his friends, and they nodded, and then they sat as before. "¿Qué pasó con ustedes?" The kid watched the man over the rim of the bowl with his dark and hollow eyes. The Indian looked at the ex-priest. "¿Qué pasó con ustedes?" The ex-priest in his black and crusted cravat turned his whole torso to look at the man who'd spoken. He looked at the kid. He'd been eating with his fingers, and he licked them and wiped them on the filthy leg of his trousers. "Las yumas?" he said. They sucked in air and clucked their tongues. "Son muy malos," said the speaker. "Claro." "No tiene compañeros?" The kid and the ex-priest eyed each other. "Sí," said the kid. "Muchos." He waved his hand to the east. "Llegarán muchos compañeros." The Indians received this news without expression. A woman brought more of the pignole, but they had been without food for too long to have appetites, and they waved her away. That day there was no sun, only a paleness in the haze, and the country was white with frost, and the shrubs were like polar isomers of their own shapes. Wild rams ghosted away up those rocky draws, and the wind swirled down cold and gray from the snowy reeks above them. A smoking region of wild vapors blowing down through the gap, as if the world up there were all afire. They spoke less and less between them, until at last they were silent altogether, as is often the way with travelers approaching the end of a journey. They drank from the cold mountain streams, and bathed their wounds, and they shot a young doe at a spring, and ate what they could and smoked thin sheets of meat to carry with them. Although they saw no more bears, they saw sign of their vicinity, and they moved off over the slope a good mile from their meat camp before they put down camp for the night. In the morning they crossed a bed of thunderstones clustered on that heath like the ossified eggs of some primal ground bird. They trod the shadow line under the mountains, keeping just in the sun for the warmth of it, and that afternoon they first saw the sea, far below them, blue and serene under the clouds. It was evening of the following day when they entered San Diego. The ex-priest turned off to find them a doctor, but the kid wandered on through the raw mud streets and out past the houses of hide in their rows and across the gravel strand to the beach. Loose strands of amber-colored kelp lay in a rubbery rack at the tide line. A dead seal. Beyond the inner bay, part of a reef in a thin line, like something foundered there on which the sea was teething. He squatted in the sand and watched the sun on the hammered face of the water. Out there island clouds emplaned upon a salmon-colored other sea. Seafowl in silhouette. Downshore the dull surf boomed. There was a horse standing there, staring out upon the darkening waters, and a young colt that cavorted and trotted off and came back. He was watching while the sun dipped, hissing in the swells. The horse stood darkly against the sky. The surf boomed in the dark, and the sea's black hide heaved in the cobbled starlight, and the long pale combers loped out of the night and broke along the beach. He rose and turned toward the lights of the town. The tide pools bright as smelter pots among the dark rocks, where the phosphorescent sea crabs clambered back. Passing through the salt grass, he looked back. The horse had not moved. A ship's light winked in the swells. The colt stood against the horse with its head down, and the horse was watching, out there past men's knowing, where the stars are drowning, and whales ferry their vast souls through the black and seamless sea.